What's up, guys? Mischief Magus here. So, oh god, it's been like, what, 5 days since I made a last video? And if we recall, if you've been keeping up, the last video was on the angles, or the stakes of heaven. This is found in Ben Dyke's one book on mundane astrology, which is far too complicated for me to even begin to comprehend, let alone teach it to other people. But one day I'll get there. And I'm sure if you're watching, Ben, which I'm sure you're not, I just want to let you know that your book is awesome. Anyway, before I begin with the succedent and the cadent houses after the angular houses, I want to go over the 12 houses, what their loose translation is. And, oh, I know you're watching. No, the 12th house is not bad karma, or karma in general. It's not. So don't worry about it. Starting from the 1st to the 12th. The first house is loosely translated as the Eastern Rising. The second house is loosely translated as rising up from the underworld. Very interesting. The third house is translated as the house of the goddess. And if we remember, the moon has her planetary joy in the third house. Or excuse me, the house joy, not the planetary joy. Planetary joy is, I assume, Cancer. But I'm sure I'm wrong. The fourth house is the lowest heaven. Hence the super deep underground stuff. I mean, you can't get any deeper than that. How deep do you want to get? Do you want to go to China? That's how deep you want to get? But, I mean, it's pretty deep. The fifth house is the house of good luck. The sixth is of bad luck. The seventh is of western setting, or setting. The eighth is casting down into the underworld. The ninth house is the house of God. The 10th house is the highest heaven. Just heads up, 10th house is really powerful. And I know I've told you that before. Just a friendly reminder. The 11th house is the house of good spirit. And the 12th house is the house of bad spirit, where Saturn likes to be. Don't want Saturn in the 12th house. Trust me. Actually, you don't want anything in the 12th house. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of iron that out because many people like to circle jerk about different, what does this house mean? Why does it mean this? Oh, it means you're an unevolved soul and you deserve to be flogged for the rest of your life because in your past life you were some royalty who liked to jerk off on the fucking serfs or some bullshit. Come on. How do you even know that? I'm sure someone has some justification somewhere. I mean, if you want to focus on your past life, you can, but I want to focus on ours right now. Anyway, I know a lot about the angles, or at least a decent portion. I don't know so much about the succedent or the cadent houses. I mean, I do, but the goal of this video and the next video, I'll cover cadent houses, which are far weaker than succedent, which are far weaker than angular, is to give you a rough idea about why these positions, considerations, and names are important for where they are. In the past, we talked about how if you have stuff in an angular house, it's basically supercharged. Like, for example, in the first house, I gave in the description an example of the witching hour, which is at like 3 o'clock or some bullshit. Witches can tell me more about it, but people will be like, oh, my lamp moved, it's the witching hour. Ah, it's also the ascendant hour. I mean, if you go put something in Astro and look where the first house is. It's usually around like 3 o'clock or some such thing. It's the strongest house you can get. Some people argue the 10th. I believe it's the first. Because it's number 1. And for other reasons. Anyway, I want to read this to you. This is also going off of Deb Holdings' Temples of the Sky, if you care to find it or download it or just private message me and I will show you where to go. So, the idea is, back in the traditional era, I don't know when, not the contemporaries, they had different perspectives on what the houses do and what they resemble. I'm just going to read a bit, and I'm probably going to read for a long while because, well, I think that it's better to hear it from the horse's mouth rather than the translator of the horse. I'm the horse translator, the horse whisperer. So this talks a little bit about the strength and planetary influences as they go throughout the regions of the chart. As an example, we're going to go into the 8th house. With the 8th house, this becomes of particular concern when it is said to describe, in modern terms, the sex life or the potential of pregnancy. Such an idea arises from the view that the area is one which deals with personal transformation at a most profound level. Since it is the house of death, then by extension it must suggest a rebirth, and the process that leads to such a rebirth too. But death, at whatever level it occurs, be it physical, material, spiritual, or emotional, is the process of loss that operates within the larger perspective of personal transformation, which the chart as a whole relates to. It has cycles and stages of its own, being preceded by weakness and succeeded by grief. Only after an appropriate period of mourning and of readjustment can creative energies reemerge to foster the growth of new life. Pregnancy, therefore, belongs to the fertile area of the 5th house, and never to the 8th, because this is an area that captures the essence of loss of creativity. The idea of astrologers electing a good time to enjoy sexual activities by strengthening the influence of the 8th house could be amusing, were it not for the abusive violations and experiences of fear and anguish related to sex that may fall within its domain. I also might remind you that when we covered planetary house joys, that Venus has her joy in the 5th house. Venus being the goddess over procreation and babies and children. And also, it's interesting, conveniently, that the 5th house resembles children. Who would have known? It's like they kind of thought about this, instead of writing some mass media book about some dog shit you don't really understand. Stop it. I don't want... Another dubious notion is the belief that a chart where the emphasis falls upon the 8th house represents a good time to apply for a loan or enter into a financial arrangement with another person. This idea is based upon the rulership of the 8th house over other people's money, which I had mentioned, since it is the 2nd house from the 7th. I'll cover that another time. Astrologers who apply this logic often forget that the 8th house is the area where our loss can become another's gain. In horary charts drawn to locate lost or stolen property, for example, the significator in the 7th house shows it has fallen into another person's hands. In the 8th, they have turned it into a financial asset. It is good to have a friendly 8th house influenced in such charts, but in matters concerning our own financial matters, it is most important to see that the 2nd house is supportive and free from affliction. Again, I'm not really talking about succeeding houses right now in general, because I just want to give you examples that someone far more educated than I has written. And to be fair, I think that's reasonable because I don't have all the answers and I don't expect you to think I do. But the next best thing is to know where to look. So yeah, this is why I'm reading this to you. And also, when you're reading about stuff like this, you have to just basically consider 3 really important considerations. This is for talismanic magic. Now I'm talking about talismanic magic. Instead of, if you want to go learn about real astrology, go find some guy who charges you whatever amount of money, and you'll learn something in about 30 minutes and then you'll be done and you'll have to charge another $300. Great, cool, whatever. But for right now, just want you to know, when we're focusing on talismans, you have to focus on where the planet is that you want to create a talisman for. The short of it is, if you want it powerful, you put it in the 1st house or the 10th house, which I covered last time in the angular video. If you stuff it in succeeding houses, the succeeding houses being the 11th, 8th, 5th, and 2nd, then why even bother? Because they're not going to have enough power. And definitely don't put it in like the 8th or the 2nd. I mean, I guess you could, but it's not going to give it a lot of power. Point is, alright, so when the sun rises over the horizon, it is strong for just about 5 degrees and then it gets weak because it's in the 12th house. 12th house cannot see the ascendant, therefore it cannot see the energy. It is messed up in a way where you can't see the light clearly. Goes up to the 11th house. Awesome, this is terrific, because it is rising. It is continuing to rise to the top. It's like someone who's like got weak legs and they're climbing up Mount Everest and they're like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And they're really optimistic. And then you get up to the top being the 10th. The 10th house is like, I am known for this. I am God. I am the greatest. I mean, you're awesome. This is what you're known for. The highest point in the sky is considered the midheaven. And then it drops. It begins to wane into the 9th house. The 9th house is great, but because it trines the ascendant. Now why? I don't know, because it does. I mean, there's reason for that because, you know, it's at a fortuitous angle, but I don't really want to get into that right now. But as it declines, it comes from its highest point and it sort of falls off. But the 9th house is still good, but it is still cadent, but it is mitigated by its cadency by the fact that it trines the ascendant, which is good because it essentially sees the source of life. Then it gets down to the 8th house, and it's waning, and also because the 8th house does not see the ascendant from its degree. Then it goes down to the 7th house. Now, the reason the 7th house is powerful is because, like I said in the last video, you are a boxer in a ring. You are directly opposing the boxer. You can see the boxer. In astrology terms, you are seeing the ascendant, which is the source of life and the beginning of all life. It's just this bright light coming at you. That's how it is. And then it goes down 6th cadent, 5th succeedent, 4th angular, deepest point, 3rd cadent, 2nd succeedent, and then of course 1st angular. The reason I mention this is because, what I mentioned before, if you're going to make a talisman, do not have it in the succeedant houses or in the cadent houses. Now, if you want to have the moon in one of those, as long as it's applying to the planet on the ascendant or the midheaven, in a good aspect, don't make it opposing or square if you can help it, you'll see how incredibly frustrating this can be to make a good talisman. But I will move on. So we will talk about the 2nd house again. Traditionally, the 2nd house is representative of our own substance and profit, while the 8th indicates an area of decline. The origin of this can be traced to the cycle and nature of the sun's interaction with the earth. It is worth noting that originally the 8th house was known as the beginning of death, because from its cusp, the heavenly sphere falls toward the descendant, which is angular. This area is an entirely unfortunate one. It has no effective access to the light of the ascendant, as I had just mentioned, and its diurnal motion is one of decline. The lack of any strong aspect from the ascendant to the 2nd house also gave this house an unfortunate reputation in astrology that was earlier. Like the 8th, classical astrologers knew it by such ominous names as the Gate of Hades, Gate of Hell, or Portal of Pluto, a tradition arising from the ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians who placed the rulership of the direction north under the guardians of the gates. Manilius gave a little detailed description of the influence of the 8th, 2nd house axis, except to show that it was unfortunate and affected by the underworld symbolism. Suspended, the former 8th house faces downward, the latter 2nd house on its back. They either fear destruction at the hands of neighboring cardinal, or will fall if cheated of its support. With justice, they are held to be the dread abodes of Typhon, whose savage earth brought forth when she gave birth to war against heaven. Very interesting. I know you're sitting there going like, what? But the idea is, because of where these houses were positioned in terms of the ascendant, they just weren't good. The 2nd house cannot see the ascendant by well-known aspects such as trine, sextile, square, and opposition. Even if you oppose the ascendant, I mean that's the 7th house, it's still pretty good. Even if it's not for you, it's strong and it might give you something good. Let's hope so, because I got a big 7th house. So, Firmicus, another old guy, also includes older Greek terminology, which informs us that the 8th house was known as something something, which means falling down into the underworld. And the 2nd house was known as rising up from the underworld. And if we think back to what I just mentioned about the 4th house at its lowest point, I mean, I don't want to say it's called the underworld, but it's the deepest point in the sky ever. And it's rising up, as the 2nd house would be. The 8th house was the portal of entry, and the 2nd of release. That's a pretty big underworld. A further clue to the symbolism of the 2nd house lies in the ancient myth of Ishtar's descent into the underworld. It was impossible to enter the underworld unless completely naked, so her journey involved the removal of all her garments and jewels upon entry. these being returned to her possession upon release. The myth reflects the cyclical process of loss and increase, which is symbolic of death and rebirth. I would mention a little bit more, but I kind of want to keep on moving on. However, right now, I'm just going to give you some general rulerships over what the second house and then the eighth house rules. So we'll go with Lily because I like Lily even though he's really complicated. Second house rules estate, fortune, substance, wealth, and poverty. Movable goods. The eighth house represents death, wills, partners, money, fear, and anguish of mind. I know I mentioned this a bit more in one of the earlier videos, but I feel that this is kind of reasonable. So ultimately, if you're focusing on succeeding houses to learn more about, and I mean, I'm not really going to bother with the 11th and the 5th houses, just know that they're probably two of the best houses you can get. I mean, one's good, the 11th is the good demon, I don't know if it's diamond, demon, you could just call it good spirit. And then the 5th is the house of good fortune. Huh. Well, those are certainly great things to know. Yes, especially compared to the second house, which is your money, and also the, what did I say it was? The leaving of the gates of the underworld. And the 8th, which is where you're going into the gate to the underworld. Yeah, let's go to the underworld. I mean, they're fine. They're not like the 12th and the 6th. Oh, and boy, those sure are fun. 6th being slavery, and 12th being you're flogging yourself and everybody hates you. Well, sort of. Long story short of this is, if you've watched the rest of this, don't put a planet in a succeedant or a cadent house. Follow the rules, what I said in my video prior to this about the pillars or stakes of whatever, the pretzels of heaven, I can't remember what I said. Put it on the ascendant angle or the midheaven. The reason I'm telling you about succeedant houses is so that you are aware of them, and also to just kind of get you away from the dross that is modern astrology. Stop reading that shit. I know I'm going to go out on a limb and people are probably going to kick and scream about it, but seriously, don't waste your time. I'm not going to tell you twice. Actually, I'm going to tell you about 500 times before you get it. Like I said, I'm not a master, but I like to think I know what I'm talking about, and I'm curious enough to kind of try and figure out the best stuff. I mean, if you want some great genius, whatever, cool, go ahead, but I mean, this is free and I try and be entertaining. Alright, I think that I'm going to move on to the next video, which will be cadent houses. Boy, those sure are fun. Alright, take care, guys.